Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thomas. I will be your trainer today. With me on the panel, we have Marco, Peter, Raphael, and Timothy. They will be supporting me during this training. So welcome to the session. Let me share my desktop with you. Today's session is regarding remote sites. We'll be looking both at the K1 and the K2, how to set up remote sites, what are the benefits of having remote sites, and how to manage them in the most efficient way. Just a few reminders before we start. These sessions are public, so please consider muting your line to reduce background noise. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat. My colleagues are online and will be answering them. And please send them to all panelists. And please hold your questions if you have any additional questions for the end of the presentations. And if you have any questions which are not directly related to today's topic, please keep them for the end of the presentation. But you will see today we'll have a slightly different layout, so we'll go and be more interactive. Just coming up for your information, the next sessions next week we'll have a K2 session, which will be regarding driver management. On April 22nd, we'll be talking agent deployment, and on April 29th, we'll be looking at patching. As I said, today is going to be slightly different. Normally, the format is a PowerPoint, and then at the end, a live demo. Since we have two topics today, I will first introduce you the K1000, just what the benefits are, and I will do a live demo. Then I'll go back to a theoretical part for the K2 and show what it is all about, and then go to a live demo. So small difference. At the end, there will be a Q&A and ample time for you to ask your questions. So what is the replication and what are the benefits of replication? The main benefit of replication is, of course, reducing network traffic along the wide area network. The whole idea is that we can optimize in the same way we do it with the K1000 on a single site, where we only download one version of a driver, one version of a patch. With remote sites, we only copy one copy to the file at that remote site, and we have the machines which we have assigned to that local site get it from there instead of getting it from a central case. This allows not only to reduce massively the cost, but also very often to increase the speed at which patches or packages are distributed to our customers. We can set up the replication share either on a local machine on which the agent is running, we'll be looking at that, or we can use a Samba share on the network to do it. This is actually what I'll be doing today. What we need, and this is really the main thing, is we need a single machine at the remote site which is running our agent. It can be a Windows, it can be a Mac machine, it can be a Linux. We have no preference on which operating system you use. During the setup, I will go and just mention for Windows that we do have a limitation, if you use a Windows machine, on the number of shares you can have concurrent shares, which on the Windows is 10 or 20, depending on the versions of the software, and that is something very important, but I'll get back to it. These replication shares we are creating at remote sites are full replications. So we have all the assets, and it is managed automatically. This is one of the beauty of Case, is that once you create a package, you don't have to worry whether it will be replicated or not. Unless you specifically say, I do not want it replicated, then we'll have a look at that. It will be automatically managed, so you don't have to worry what is going where. We can still set up a certain granular control and restrict a certain content to certain sites. Let's say you have a remote site that only works with Macintosh. Why would you like to replicate any Windows content for that site? So we'll see how we can configure that during replication. We can also, and this is very important for many customers, control bandwidth during certain times of the day. For example, if you have a Citrix connection between the main site and the remote site, you don't want maybe to the replication to happen during the day, and which would interfere with that. So we'll be looking at that during this setup. So this will be a very, very hands-on situation, but just to understand what we're talking about, this is in a nutshell how replication works. On the left, we have the classic scenario where we have a K1000 located at the main site, and the local clients are connected directly to this K, and they get patches, packages, and all script elements. On the other hand, when we have a remote site, the first thing we need is a replication share. We will see how we set it up and what credentials we need to set up on the site. We need to have a replication computer, which will basically be driving the replication and will be getting the files from the K1000 and then pushing it to this replication share. Again, this replication share can be either on a network resource or it can be stored on the local machine. We have no preference regarding that. So that is so on that side. On the other side, we do have remote clients which will be defining for a label. And defining them with the label will make sure that instead of going to the K1000, they will go and get the files from the replication share. We'll also see that we can set up a failover that in case the replication share is not available, the machines will go to the main K1000. We'll discuss the pros and cons of this solution, and then we'll have the direct machine. Finally, and this is very important, the machines which are at the remote site still need to be able to connect to the K1000 as central location. So using a replication share is not possible if there is no connection between the clients at the remote site and the central case. Some customers have asked us with specific needs, like for example, some countries with very, very low bandwidth, where if they could cut off the whole connection between the agents and the main case. This is not possible. The clients must still be able to connect to the main case, because this is where the label will be applied and they will get the information on where to get the elements they need to download. So again, this link, this inventory link, is extremely important. So setting it up, the first thing we'll need to do on the case side is creating a label on which we will assign the machines to the location. A very easy way of doing it, for example, is creating a label based on IP range. This is a very common way of doing it, but we can also create labels based, for example, on LDAP. Here an example, I've just got a group called AA, which would be a remote site, so I can also use an LDAP, having my machines assigned to that. Again, there are pros and cons. Using a dynamic label for the IP addresses makes it very easy if a user moves from one location to the other to always be, as soon as he checks in, at that location, and therefore having the advantage of using the benefit of having the shortest distance or not using the WAN. On the other hand, using LDAP can be a benefit for very static structures. On the other hand, we'll also be looking at the setup. We'll be looking at the granularity and what we can define, which elements, but I think it will be best if I show you this live on the machine. So without further ado, let me just go over to the live machine and go over. First of all, are there any questions up to now? Marco, Olivier, do you have any feedbacks or anything in the chat? I don't see anything in the Q&A up to now. So let me move to the live machine.
Special is fantastic.
Perfect. Oh, fantastic. So here I've got a K1000, which is running and which I have my machine. So the first step on the K1000 side would be creating a smart label. So let's create a smart label. Typically, you would create something with an IP address. So you could do something like IP address begins with, and then you can give a beginning of a range. I'll just use my local range as an example. So I could say begins with 192.168.2. I can test it. Of course, all my local machines are on that. Then I could create a label, which I could therefore just affix key saying this is far away location. So that could be my site, and I create my label. So by defining this IP address, I can select all the machines at that remote location, and they will be assigned to the remote share. I could, of course, add a line, for example, giving something like the name of the operating system does not contain server, so I would be only targeting clients. I could also be more granular, of course, in my label. But right away, just having a label with this IP range is simple enough. So first of all, we have a label. Secondly, we do need a replication share. So in my home environment, I have a NAS, and I have created a replication folder. This folder has properties, and on the properties and the permission, I have given admin, which has read and write credentials, and guests, which are read only. So very simple. You could, of course, do it with your Windows share and set it up. So we are ready to set up our replication. We need to go to Distribution, Replication, and let's have a look at the one I've already set up. So the first thing, configure it. And the second one is actually a very important point, which is failover to appliance. So the failover to appliance is whether if the remote share is not available, do we want the clients to go back to the central case and get the files? Depending on what your customer's requirements are, this might make sense. Let's say you have a day zero patch you need absolutely to get across to all your machines, then all the machines at the remote site will go back to your central case. Of course, this will mean that your WAN will be definitely overloaded or loaded, so there might be some restrictions or limitations. On the other hand, very often, especially in system management, time is not that critical, so you may want to wait until the replication share is back online. So depending on what your customer's needs are, you may not want to select this. So then the next step is selecting a machine which will be our replication machine. Again, the only thing we need on that machine is an agent running. And again, this machine can be Windows, Mac, or Linux. Just again, and this is very, very important, if you're using a Windows machine, just be sure that the version of Windows you are using allows enough concurrent shares on the share you created and you're managing. So this is something which is very important. If you're running a share on the machine running Windows, be careful about that. Standard Windows is 10 shares, Enterprise is 20 shares, but you are limited to that. So the choice of a remote NAS may be actually very good. Then you may choose which kind of operating system you want to, or content you want to replicate. So let's say, for example, your site is only using Mac, you may select only Mac, or you may just go for your Windows versions, or you may, of course, select everything, because this is, of course, something you may want if your visitors are coming and just going to the office a few times, you may want to have everything available. But again, you can be extremely granular as you want. In the languages which will be available here are only determined by the languages Case has seen on machines you have. So for right now, in my environment, I do have machines which are running in English and in French. Therefore, it is offering me the option of the languages. If you only have machines in your language, be it French, Italian, German, or English, and only one language, you will only see that language. So this only appears if you have different languages. You can also define whether you want to include application patches and also include our Dell updates. For example, if your remote site does not have a single Dell machine, it does of course not make sense to replicate any Dell content to that remote site. Setting it up is a straightforward progress. My environment does not have a domain, so I don't need to enter this information. But what I need is basically two steps. The first one will be the destination to which my machine running the agent will be able to write. So this is very simple. I need to enter my address. I could either enter it as an IP address or just as the name of the machine. But there I'm flexible at this stage. I need to have a user who has rights on that machine, so is able to write on that folder with passwords. And I need to select a label which will go for the machines. So I can use label I just created, faraway locations. So again, all the machines which have been created based on that will go, and they will get it from that folder. Download share, the same idea. I need the credentials, and this is a guest, which will be read-only. And I can give a path. And this one needs to be as a VNC path, so I need to have a / name and replica and the path to it. Once I've set up, the last step, and this is actually quite an important step, is defining when the replication takes care. So you're probably familiar that on clicking on each box, I can define the quality of service or bandwidth I'm assigning to that time. If I don't enter any value, leave it at 0 here, it is maximum speed which is allowed. Just be aware that the speed is in bytes, so just be careful with your conversions on that. And also a little trick, you know that at the end of the line or at the top of each line, you can select the whole row or the whole, and this is very, very practical. You may also, if you have quite a few replications, copy the schedules if you had others. You would have here a list. If you have many sites, you probably have similar patterns of replication, and you may want to copy it. On the other hand, for example, if you're operating in different time zones, it might make sense that you apply different replication schedules depending on the time zone and on the network workload. You may also consider things like, for example, if you're running a centralized backup, not to have the replication taking care at the same time. So just those are elements you may need to consider. So once you set it up, I'll just do a cancel. We will have our status here and our information, and the most important is enabled. If we look at the share itself, we will see one thing. So here I am on my share, and the replication will start. You will see at the base a folder called rep2, REPL2. This is our main replication folder, and you will see subfolders with the content and the modifications. So, for example, if I go into it, patches, and you will see that for each patch, Case has actually added an MD5 checksum. This is very important because this will allow us, when Case does continuous verification of the share, to see if the file is really the one we've modified. You will see that this is also very practical for other users. But each file that is replicated gets an MD5 checksum in order to make sure that we're really copying the right file and that the file which is at the other end is correct. So the replication goes on. You can see that you can also, if you want, in your settings, you can enable, disable, you can halt it. So for example, if you're doing something maintenance where you need the bandwidth, you can halt it. Or you can, on the other hand, force the inventory and it will be connecting to your machine. One very important use of these MD5 checksums is that, let's say you are setting up quite a lot of remote sites, and basically each of these sites will have similar content to the other. So instead of having the full load on the network, what you may want to do is simply copy this folder, copy it to a USB key, send this USB key over to the remote location, have somebody upload it to the replica share for you, and at that moment, enable the replication. The first thing Case will do, it will compare the content of this REPL2 folder with the list it has, and it will then only copy anything that has changed. So the delta sum of what has changed will be replaced. So this is something very, very practical if you're deploying to either locations with poor bandwidth or to many locations in order to save your network. This is a very practical solution. This is also, other customers use that who have very poor bandwidth. Once a month, sending over a DVD or sending over a USB key with the latest patches, having it halted meanwhile, uploading them to the new machine or to the replication share, and then enabling the replication. Again, only the delta, maybe it might be a few drivers, might be a few scripts, are replicated, and this is, of course, very good for saving bandwidth. So this is, in the case, the main information. Again, looking at it, the key information we need is a machine, and again, be very careful of any machine if you're running a share on the Windows machine on the number of replication shares. Then you need to select what you want, eventually the language, the content, determine a share, and just give it a pass, credentials which are able to write to it, determine a label of the machines which will go there. So again, let's use the far away location, and defining a download share, so where they local machines, which are part of that label, will go and get it. You can either give them a guest credential with read-only sites, and then you decide when it happens. Are there any questions on setting up a replication share? I see a question from Chris. Does it make sense to create a remote share for a local site to offload works for the KBox? This is actually a very good question. You may, if you have a large campus, of course, have replication shares across the campus. So for example, if you have a university, you may have it per school. You may have one for law school, medicine, or physics. And you could, for example, use Active Directory or the people who are connected to that local part of the subnet. So using a replication share as a local offload tool is, of course, absolutely possible. And since there is no additional cost in using replication shares, you can, of course, use it. And once the replication share is set up, you don't have to do any background maintenance on it anymore. So this is something which, if you have a larger campus, may be a very efficient way of managing and removing load, especially if you feel you have bottlenecks on your network, that you just have the proper replication shares. Just be careful with your network design that you don't have people going from one side to the other of the campus just because they're on subnets. But this is just a simple design consideration, nothing more. Are there any other questions? No. So let me go back to my PowerPoint and let us move on to the K2000. The K2000 is slightly different because we have one main requirement, which is the DHCP and PXE boot feature. So when on the K1, on the main site with the K2000, we have our DHCP and our server. So we have the PXE process, we have our DHCP address, which is provided by the DHCP server, and then which is pointed to the K2000, and then deployment to the client. On the remote side, this is not possible because our K2000 cannot connect to this remote site. So this is something where we cannot connect our main central K2000 to a client located at another location. So we need to be creative, and we did it by solving it by using the remote site appliance RSA. The RSA is a virtual machine which is available to you free of charge and which will take over, copy, and manage the installations at that remote site. So we synchronize the content of the K2000 with the remote site. We'll see also which content we can synchronize and at what rhythm the synchronization takes place. Then the DHCP server locally will be managing the PXE boot and therefore the connection to the remote site, and the remote site will be doing the deployments. We'll also see that any KBEs you created on the central K2000 will be automatically adapted to the local site, so it will take over the network settings, so you don't have to create separate KBEs for the separate sites. And as for the K1000, there's no additional costs. There are just a couple of things which we will have to look into the hardware. So again, no costs. The idea, and especially when we're using large images, removing any pressure on the wide area network is of course something which is very, very important and a big benefit of using the K2000 remote site appliance. We can also create multiple deployment points. And the RSAs can all be managed centrally from your main K2000. So once it's set up, no need to go there, even no need actually to go into that console. So you can manage that. We can also do incremental synchronization. So this is also very practical. And as for the K1 synchronization, we can do throttling, so quality of service, so we can maintain up service. Again, this is very important when we're copying large quantities of files. So the requirements, since it is an OVF, we have a simple requirements. You'll see that they're very modest. We need a Pentium 4 with 2 gigahertz or higher. We need 200 gigabytes of free space and 2 gigabytes of RAM. The virtual machine software, it runs on EOS X, it runs on VM Player or VMware Server, and we need a VMware Center Converter. So the requirements are extremely simple. So cost, again, can be minimized. Of course, for optimum performance would require a bigger server, but again, you can have just a machine, an old Optiplex lying around, and it will perfectly do its work. The OVF itself can be downloaded either from case.com support downloads. Just a little note, I checked yesterday, and actually the file was not available. So I'll show you how to get it from the case, but at this stage on the case.com support site, the file is missing, and I've just already escalated the issue. So there are a couple of steps which are extremely easy. Import the VM, so I'll show you how to do that. Then we'll need to configure the settings and license, which is basically the same thing when you do your initial console deployment and you set your config and your network settings. We need to link them together. We'll do that during the demonstration. And we'll add RSA as a remote site appliance to the case, and then we'll configure the steps to put we'll configure the objects we want to sync, and then we'll set up the synchronization. So we'll have a look at that together. So the settings, again, they're fairly easy, and we'll have a look at that in detail. And again, without further ado, let's go for the live machine. That's probably going to be much more interesting for you. So here, I do have a K2000, which is populated. You see there are a few boot environments, some source media, some scripted installations which are set up, and a few drivers which are on there. I do have a remote site, and you see that the synchronization has already taken place, and it is just already working. If I look at my deployments, remote sites, I see my remote site. I'll just give it an IP address. It gives me status. The synchronization has been completed, and it tells me how much time it has taken. Of course, I'm on a local network, so the 16 gigs have taken 19 minutes. But if I go into it, I can have a look at my settings. So the first thing is I can limit the speed of my transfer. You see that this time it's in kilobytes, but I can limit again and throttle my replication. I can also decide whether I want to upgrade or synchronize the data manually, or whether I want to do that at a certain interval. So I could say any weekday at 6 o'clock in the morning, or I can do it manually. Then, contrary to the K1000 and the K2000, I can be a bit more granular and select which I want. So for example, here I have my scripted installation, so I can just select those and say replicate. You will see also that I have the current version, which is the one on my machine, and the remote version, so it would see if there's any discrepancy between either. You can very quickly check, and if needed, just force a synchronization. So I don't have any system images. I have my boot environments, which are there. I can select them, and I have some user states, and I can just click Save and Sync. On the RSA side, so the replication takes place, there's nothing really you have to do for that to be up and running. So the synchronization will take place, and in a few minutes we will see that the data will have been replicated. If we look at setting up the remote site here, I have actually for you an empty RSA. This RSA has not been linked. The only thing I did is import the OVF, set it up, and just add the network information. So basic steps you would do for your K1000 or K2000. I just used the console config, gave my address, and here I went with my browsers into it and set it up. In order for my K2000 to connect to my remote site, I will first of all need to link them together and then add them. So let me just first of all remove that one and just remove a bit of garbage so we're losing. So the first thing I need to do is on my K2000 to make sure that my linking is enabled. So it was already enabled since I have one, but we see we need to enable the linking and we need to copy this key. So step number one, on my K2000, I make sure the linking is enabled, copy the key, and then I go to my RSA in the settings, case linking, and I enable my linking. I'll just leave the host name. I could, of course, add an FQDN if I want. And I will now, you see new menu has appeared, manage linked appliance, and I will add, first of all, the key and the IP address of my K2000. I could also have the option of using SSL, and I can save it. Now, when I link, I just need to do the second step, which is from the remote site appliance, copy the key, go to my K2000, you can see that my first replication is already there. I add a new one. I give the IP address, 192.168.2.103. I paste my connection key, and I save it. I need one more step, which is the final step. In my deployments, go to remote sites, choose action, and go new. And you see that the new one is in the list. Go next. The first thing that happens once a connection is established is the K2 will verify whether the remote site appliance does have the latest version of the OVF, and if necessary, it will update it. So then we could check remote site version, or we could force an upgrade to remote site. But here we can again define if we want to limit our synchronization. I can define which packs, so which scripted installation I want to send over. I don't have any system images I'm replicating. And I can set, by default, my main boot KBE has been selected, but I can add any KBEs I want. And here I could add, if I wanted, some user states, which are set up. And my synchronization is now up and running. You see remote sites waiting on server task queue, and the synchronization will start. So this is a very straightforward process, and our replications are running. And within a few minutes, you will see on your remote sites the data starting to be copied and move forward into your replication. So this is a very simple process. Again, no extra costs for getting the remote site. Just a little note for the remote site. So you can download the OVFs from here. So if you go to deployments, remote sites, choose action, download OVF. Interesting, lost my connection. And you can go to your appliance maintenance and you can just check for the latest version so that you get the latest version of the OVF. So again, settings, appliance maintenance, and then you can check for the latest image. So your replication takes place. So in a nutshell, this is the replication. We don't have to worry, of course, about users and labels because we don't have those in the K2000. And your machines, which will be at the remote site, you will therefore, of course, need to set up your DHCP settings, eventually option 66 or 67 on your DHCP server. And you could also, therefore, send the traffic to your main case. One little thing which I forgot to mention before, but this is a little tip on the K1, and sorry for jumping for the topic, is I said we can on the K1 limit the replication. So, for example, if you are not willing to replicate a package, you could select your package and you can go down and say, don't replicate. So on the K1, all the replications are by default fully automatic, and you can just exclude manually certain files. On the K2, on the other hand, you decide when you do your replication which files you are replicating, and you need to select specifically, and you need to make sure at what time the replication takes place automatically, or make sure that you do it manually. But of course, on the K2, we have an environment which is a bit more stable or changes less than in the K1. In K1, you will have very often new patches coming in, whereas on the K2, it changes a bit less. So that makes sense that we don't push an automated replication continuously. Are there any questions on these two elements? I don't see any in our Q&A queue. I don't see in our chat. My colleagues from the team, did you get any questions? Marco, Olivier? Okay, thank you, Tim. Okay, opening the discussion. So does anybody have questions regarding the topic? And by the way, my dear colleague panelists, how do I open the microphones to people attending? Marco, can you help me on opening the microphones?
Right-click in the list of the attendees, and there you can unmute.
Okay, sorry. You feel the non-expert at work, and it is not working. So maybe you want to just raise your hand if you have questions. I'll try to open the microphones to you. Actually, I'm opening them right now.
Siempre son installation.
So we're getting there. Are there any questions?
Where is the downloading?
I don't think we have any additional questions. So let me go back in a few seconds to my presentation, and then we are there. So if there are no further questions, so let's move forward and see what is waiting for us again. Again, next week we'll have the K2000 driver management. On April 22nd, we'll have the agent deployment options. And on the 29th, we'll have patching basics. Of course, this is the environment. Today's environment was on K163 and on K237. Just a note, we released last week the newest version of our mobile app. So we are now at version 2.3 of our K1000 Go mobile app. So just that is new on our side. And of course, if you need further resources, support softwaredell.com, where you can get all our service requests. For our trainings, case.com/KKE if you want to watch the recordings. We had a question a few weeks ago, of course. It takes a few weeks for our recordings to be online. We apologize for that, so we'll try to improve on that one. Case.com newsletter, where you can get our InkPad newsletter with our information. Many of you are familiar with itninja.com, where you can interact with your peers, ask questions, find information on system management. If you want any feature added to Case, go to case.uservoice.com. Many people do submit features. Quite a few do get accepted. You can vote for the features you would like to most see, and our people from engineering are definitely looking at it very, very often. So we are reactive to that. And of course, you can connect to case.com, join, and be rewarded for your participation. So if there are no further questions, I want to thank you very much for attending the session, and we of course look forward to having you back for other KKEs. Thank you to all, and I wish you a very, very good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Raphael.